determine. Is that what you want me to read?
Uh-huh.
All right.
What is residual risk?
It's not a highlighted word, so I'm going to read the entire paragraph. Based on the foregoing, the auditor develops expectations and makes an assessment of the risk that is particular to a risk that a particular account balance or assertion may be misstated. The auditor has reason to believe the risk misstatement is low. The auditor may be able to gain satisfaction regarding the account balance without directly testing it. Other techniques such as using substantive analytical procedures or analyzing the quality of the control system may yield persuasive evidence about the correctness of an account balance. This is not meant to imply that an auditor can perform a complete audit without ever directly testing some account balances. It means that the amount of testing can be minimized if risks are adequately addressed. However, if there is a high risk, then an account balance may be misstated. The auditor should direct more attention to the audit of that account.
So basically, residual risk relate to specific individual account balances that they could be misstated, okay? So be aware of what a residual risk is. It's the account balance can be off. So basically, we've got all these different things we have to take into account. Potential.
Basically, all that means is that the account balance could be off?
Well,
Wouldn't residual mean that if it's off, it's going to continuously always be off no matter what? Because residual, it's just continuing.
but the residual risk, what's the likelihood the account balance can be misstated? So we have to look at each account.
Estimated risk?
Well, it's called residual risk. So, for example, we might have the fear that our cash account could probably be misstated, or maybe not. Maybe if we know someone is just methodically balancing that account, they might not be off. What's the likelihood that our sales could potentially be off? Because you can jack up sales just to make the numbers look good. So you have to look at each account to see where's the likelihood something could be potentially misstated. This is the key I want to focus on. Audit risk. So this is truly a model auditors use to come up with how they're going to plan the audit. Audit risk is equal to inherent risk times control risk times detection risk. What does all of that mean?
It's all related?
They're all related. Our total audit risk is going to be a combination of inherent risk. Just because of the nature of the type of account it is, certain cash can just walk away. Certain accounts are more potential, the ability for fingers to take the money away just by nature of the type of account it is, are going to be at higher scrutiny. Control risk. What kind of controls are in place to protect certain accounts? And then detection risk. What's the likelihood we're going to detect if there is a misstatement? Make sense? So this audit risk model shows and lets the auditor look at and determine how important these items are to value. Complex or unusual transactions that are more likely to be recorded in error than simple transactions are. Doesn't that make sense? If you have 5 of the same type of transactions every month, it's relatively simple to know this is how they need to be recorded. The more complicated you get certain types of leasing or certain types of lease back items, the more you have to look into those type of accounts. Guys, I'm going to give you an example of what happened last night in my office. I have a client, they own several airplanes, and they lease these airplanes out to individuals. So let's say they lease out one airplane, they get $100,000 a year in rents, and they have all their expenses. And then another airplane, they might get $30,000, $40,000. But their expenses are great because this is a twin-engine airplane with 10 seats. Well, what they do is they want to charge themselves $10 an hour to personally fly this airplane. And I'm like, $10 an hour, but what's an average person pay? Well, about 120. I'm like, well, why are you even charging $10 an hour? I mean, this isn't an arm's length transaction. Well, because we want to be able to take all the expenses and show that there isn't any personal use. Do you understand what I'm trying to get at? Do you see how certain transactions, you can just look and see rents, but if I'm seeing $150 an hour is the average hourly rate, then all of a sudden there's $10 an hour. You need to be able to understand what's the motive behind them trying to do this. Well, technically speaking, let's just say the owner is using it for personal use 30% of the time. Technically, shouldn't 30% of all those expenses not be deductible? So the way they're trying to get around it is by...
Doesn't that depend on what the regulations are for airplanes as opposed to like personal vehicles?
Well, from a tax standpoint, if I own a car, and I'm saying it's a business car, but if I'm using it 4,000 miles a year for personal and 6,000 miles a year for business, that personal use I have to add back into income. Okay? Or I can't...
You can't claim that. You wouldn't be able to claim that as a business vehicle, would you?
I can only claim 60% of it as a business vehicle. And so what they're trying to do is get around it and show it's 100% business use by showing some rents, but we're talking $10 versus 150. Is that fair? So do you see what I'm trying to get at as an auditor? You need to understand how the transactions can be kind of misstated. Not that that transaction is wrong, but what they're trying to do by taking all the expenses then is wrong. Because they need to still be at some type of arm's length transaction. I'm not saying they need to charge themselves $150 an hour, but $10 an hour, is that going to fly? Especially if they're using it 30% of the time. Could that be a material misstatement? But do you see how we have to understand those transactions and how they're doing them and why they're doing them? Make sense, guys? Is that an example of kind of what I'm trying to explain to you? Better internal controls mean a lesser likelihood of misstatement. How can that be? If you have better internal controls, you're going to have a less likelihood of misstatement. Why do we think that? We have checks and balances in place. The amount of persuasive audit evidence, the amount and persuasiveness of audit evidence gathered should vary directly to the likelihood of material errors. So when we have really good audit information and materials and backup documentation, we're going to have a better sense of trust that the financial statements are going to be presented okay. So guys, what I'm going to do is today I'm in my office until about 4. I am going to go ahead and pre-record a lecture for the rest of this, just in case our St. Scholastica goes over, and I don't want to harm you with what we were going to learn on Thursday. I will also provide you a lecture with some of the homework problems. You know how you're supposed to turn in homework? And those of you who watch the lectures get some help, if you know what I mean. So I will have that for you also. Any questions at all with this chapter? How are we all doing? Easier than fund accounting?
Yeah.
Is it making sense? You see, it's a truly systematic approach here. Guys, take care. You gotta like it. It's hippie. Look at it. Isn't it fun? Can you make you smile? What?
And when he said, beautiful, I just want you to know you are really good. That's his song.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm very
Tuesday, would you get me like any packet or information? that
Sure.
they have? I can't get off work because I already get
No
off on
problem.
Tuesdays.
No
But I
problem.
really want